I keep the books. I have always kept the books. And now I keep a record of their emptying. The office smells of ink and dust and something else, the particular staleness of worry that settles into wood and paper when money stops moving. I sit at my desk by the window where the afternoon light comes in weakest, slanting across the scarred oak surface at an angle that changes with the seasons. In September, the light reaches the edge of my blotter by 3 o'clock. By November, it will barely touch my desk at all. I open the ledger to September 1930, running my finger down columns that once held the architecture of a life. The paper is heavy, expensive, the kind Mr. Millard's father insisted on when he founded the company. A business's records should outlast the business itself, he used to say. I wonder if he imagined they might serve as a kind of memorial. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 41 years old, and for 17 years I have been the bookkeeper at Millard & Sons Manufacturing, makers of industrial valves and pipe fittings in Akron, Ohio. I keep the books. I have always kept the books. And now I keep a record of their emptying. The letter from Hutchison Brothers Hardware should have arrived on September 10th. I know this because I have kept a private calendar of expected payments for 3 years now, a separate notation system that exists only in a small brown notebook I keep in my desk drawer. Every account has a rhythm, a pattern of payment. Hutchison Brothers paid on the 10th of each month like clockwork, had done so since April 1921. September 10th came and went, no check. I made a small pencil mark in the margin of the ledger next to their account line. Just a tiny vertical stroke, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. One mark meant a week overdue. This was my private early warning system, developed over years of watching businesses the way a farmer watches clouds. The mark sat there like a small accusation. On September 11th, I checked the morning mail twice. Nothing. On the 12th, I wrote the date in my notebook. Hutchison Brothers, first delay since 1921. Then I went back to my other work, because there were still orders to process, invoices to prepare, receipts to record. The machinery of commerce continues even when individual parts begin to fail. But I kept glancing at that pencil mark all day. At 4:30, Mr. Millard came out of his office. He always emerged at 4:30, as regular as the factory whistle, and stood at the railing overlooking the shop floor. 27 men were working below, the sound of their labor a steady percussion of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, the clank of finished valves being sorted into crates. He watched them for a moment, then turned to me. "Anything unusual today, Helen?" Mr. Millard never asked this question unless he already sensed something. He had an instinct for trouble, the way some people have an instinct for weather. "Hutchison Brothers' payment is late, sir. 2 days now." "First time?" "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the railing. He was 62 years old, with thick gray hair and hands still strong from the years he'd spent on the shop floor himself before his father died and left him the business. Those hands knew the weight of metal, the resistance of a wrench, the particular way a valve body felt when it was properly machined. "Write to them Monday," he said. "Polite inquiry." "Yes, sir." He went back to his office. I made a note in my reminder book. Monday, letter to Hutchison Brothers. Then I closed my ledger for the day, put on my hat and coat, and walked home through streets that looked exactly the same as they always had, even though something had shifted. Some small gear had slipped, some tiny bearing had worn smooth, and the machine was beginning, just beginning, to run differently. I wrote the letter on Monday morning, September 15th. I've written hundreds of such letters over the years. There is a formula to them, a careful architecture of language. Dear Mr. Hutchison, This is to call your attention to your account with Millard & Sons Manufacturing, which shows an outstanding balance of $347.50, now 5 days past due. We understand that temporary delays in payment may occasionally occur due to circumstances beyond one's control, and we wish to work with you to resolve this matter promptly. Please remit payment at your earliest convenience or contact our office to discuss arrangements. Respectfully yours, Helen Carter, bookkeeper, Millard & Sons Manufacturing. The language is careful. Call your attention, as if they might have simply forgotten. Temporary delays, as if we all believe this is an anomaly. Work with you, as if we are partners in solving a mutual problem rather than creditor and debtor locked in the ancient dance of money owed. I typed it on the underwood, sealed it in an envelope with our return address embossed in the corner, and placed it in the outgoing mail basket. Then I went back to my other work. There is always other work. A bookkeeper's job is never finished. The ledger is a living document that grows with each transaction. On September 15th alone, I recorded payment received from Morrison Machine Shop, Toledo, $156. Invoice sent to Great Lakes Foundry, $892.50 for 53-inch gate valves. Payment made to Cleveland Steel Supply, $234.75. Wages paid, weekly payroll, 27 employees, $621. Payment received from Fairfield Supply, $445. Each entry required 3 separate actions: recording in the daybook, posting to the ledger, filing the supporting document. Every transaction touched at least 3 places. This redundancy was intentional. Miss Pemberton had drilled it into us at business college. A single record can be wrong, she said. A single record can be altered. But when 3 records tell the same story, that story becomes truth. I believed her then. I believe her still. Though I am learning that sometimes 3 records can simply mean the same mistake, made 3 times in 3 different places. The response from Hutchison Brothers arrived September 24th, 9 days after my letter. The envelope was thinner than usual, and I knew before I opened it that there would be no check inside. Dear Mrs. Carter, thank you for your letter of September 15th. We apologize for the delay in payment. Business conditions have been difficult recently, and our own receivables have been slower than usual. We expect to be able to remit half the outstanding balance, $173.75, by October 1st, with the remainder to follow by mid-November. We value our long-standing relationship with Millard & Sons and appreciate your patience during this temporary difficulty. Sincerely, Theodore Hutchison. I read the letter 3 times. Then I made my second pencil mark next to the Hutchison Brothers account. 2 marks meant 2 weeks overdue, and filed the letter in the correspondence folder. Temporary difficulty. Everyone believed it was temporary. That was what made it bearable. The assumption that this was just a rough patch, a brief interruption in the normal flow of commerce, a pothole in an otherwise smooth road. But I had begun to notice something. When I reviewed the correspondence files from the past month, I found the same phrase appearing again and again in different letters from different companies. Temporary difficulty. Temporary cash flow challenges. Temporarily delayed. Temporary, as if repetition could make it true. My ledger is a universe of columns, each one a category, a certainty, a place where things belong. Date, account, description, debit, credit, balance. For 17 years, I have made the world fit into these columns. Every transaction, every promise, every movement of value from one hand to another, all of it captured, organized, made rational by the simple act of recording it in the proper place. The ledger I use is a Wilson-Jones columnar book, model C41, with green cloth binding and marbled end papers. The pages are numbered consecutively. My current volume runs from page 847 to page 1246, which tells you something about how long I've been doing this. Each page is divided into 32 lines. Each line can hold one transaction, though complex entries sometimes require 2 lines, which I mark with a small bracket in the left margin. I learned bookkeeping at the Bryant and Stratton Business College for Women in Cleveland in 1911. 23 young women in a room that smelled of floor wax and chalk dust bent over practice ledgers while Miss Pemberton walked between our desks with her ruler, checking our work. "Your figures should be uniform," she would say, tapping the ruler against someone's desk. "Each number the same size, the same slant, the same spacing. A ledger is a public document. It should be readable by anyone, at any time, without interpretation." She taught us that bookkeeping was not merely record-keeping, but a kind of sacred trust. "You are the guardians of truth," she told us. "In a world where people lie, where memories fail, where disputes arise, the ledger stands as objective witness. Numbers don't lie. Your job is to make sure no one else does either." I took this seriously. I still take it seriously. My numbers are pristine, each digit formed with careful precision, each decimal point perfectly aligned. When I rule off an account at month's end, my line is perfectly straight, drawn with a ruler and India ink. When I total a column, I check it 3 times before entering the sum. This precision has always given me satisfaction. There is something deeply comforting about the way numbers behave, their predictability, their honesty, their refusal to be anything other than what they are. 2 plus 2 is always 4. A debit must always balance with a credit. The books must always close. Must always close. By the end of September, I had made pencil marks next to 4 accounts. Hutchison Brothers, Hardware, 2 marks. Morrison Machine Shop, 1 mark. Fairfield Supply, 1 mark. Canton Metalworks, 1 mark. 4 accounts out of 43 active customers, less than 10%. Statistically insignificant, really, well within normal variation. But something about those 4 marks troubled me in a way I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't their number, it was their timing. All 4 delays had started within the same 2-week period. All 4 letters I'd received in response had used some variation of the word temporary. I began a new notation system, one Mr. Millard never saw, one that existed only in my private notebook. Beside each troubled account, I wrote a single word describing what I imagined was happening on the other end. Hutchison Brothers, waiting. Morrison Machine, stretched. Fairfield Supply, struggling. Canton Metalworks, worried. These were not bookkeeping terms. They had no place in any ledger. But I was tracking something my columns had no category for: the temperature of fear. October arrived with a cold snap. Temperatures dropping into the 40s at night, frost on the windows in the morning. I wore my wool coat to work and kept it on until the building warmed up, usually around 10 o'clock, when the steam heat finally reached the office. The first Monday in October, I received 3 more delayed payment letters. The first was from Great Lakes Foundry, one of our oldest customers. They'd been buying from us since 1907. Mr. Millard's father had sold them their first order personally. Their letter was brief. "Regret to inform you, payment will be delayed 2 weeks due to temporary collection difficulties. Appreciate your understanding." The second was from Morrison Machine Shop, their second delay, elevating them to 3 pencil marks, which meant I would need to inform Mr. Millard. The third was from a company I'd never heard us have trouble with, Youngstown Pipe and Fitting, who'd always paid within 5 days of receiving our invoice. Their letter was longer than the others. Dear Mrs. Carter, I write to you personally because I know you keep the accounts and will understand the situation. We are facing difficulties we have never experienced in 23 years of operation. Our own customers are not paying, which means we cannot pay our suppliers, which means you. I am not making excuses. I am simply telling you the truth. We owe you $567. I can send you $200 now, and I will send the rest as soon as I am able. I give you my word on this, though I know words are not currency. I hope you and Mr. Millard will bear with us during these hard times. Yours truly, Samuel Chen, Proprietor, Youngstown Pipe and Fitting. I read that letter 4 times. There was something in its tone, a nakedness, a stripping away of the usual commercial pretense that unsettled me. This wasn't temporary difficulty. This was a man telling me he was drowning. I made 3 pencil marks next to Youngstown Pipe and Fitting. By October 8th, I had marks next to 9 accounts. By October 15th, 14 accounts. By October 22nd, 19. I began to understand what was happening. The problem wasn't individual customers having individual troubles. The problem was that everyone was having the same trouble simultaneously, and everyone's trouble was everyone else's cause. It worked like this. The foundries weren't buying our valves because the construction companies weren't building. The construction companies weren't building because the banks weren't lending. The banks weren't lending because people weren't depositing. People weren't depositing because they weren't earning. They weren't earning because factories were cutting shifts. Factories were cutting shifts because orders were down. Orders were down because the foundries weren't buying. It was a circle, a loop, a snake eating its own tail. And I could see it happening in real time, line by line, in my ledger. Each empty space where a payment should have been was connected to another empty space somewhere else, and another, spreading outward like cracks in ice. On October 24th, I remember the date because it was the day after my mother's 73rd birthday. I did something I had never done before. I calculated how much money was owed to us that we hadn't yet collected. This wasn't complicated mathematics. It was simple addition. Hutchison Brothers, $347.50, now 6 weeks overdue. Morrison Machine, $156, 4 weeks. Fairfield Supply, $445, 6 weeks. Canton Metal Works, $234, 5 weeks. Great Lakes Foundry, $892.50, 3 weeks. Youngstown Pipe and Fitting, $367, 3 weeks after partial payment. And 13 more accounts in various states of delay. Total outstanding receivables more than 30 days old, $6,847.50. I stared at that number for a long time. Nearly $7,000. Money we had earned, goods we had shipped, value we had created, simply suspended in the air, existing on paper, but not in our bank account. Our monthly operating expenses were approximately $2,800, which meant we were owed almost 2.5 months' worth of operating costs. I ran the calculation again, thinking I'd made an error. I hadn't. Then I did something else I'd never done. I calculated our actual cash position, how much money we had in the bank versus how much we needed to operate. Bank balance, as of October 24th, $4,341.78. Monthly expenses, $2,800. Runway, 1.5 months. 1.5 months. If no more money came in, if every customer simply stopped paying, we could operate until mid-December. Of course, money was still coming in. Payments were arriving, just slower, smaller, more irregular, like a heartbeat becoming arrhythmic. I closed my ledger and sat at my desk, looking out the window at the factory yard. 3 trucks were parked there, delivery vehicles we owned outright, paid off years ago. In the October light, they looked solid, real, valuable. But their value existed only if someone needed them, only if there was something to deliver. Mr. Millard came out of his office at 4:30, as always. He stood at the railing, watching the floor below. 27 men, still working. The factory was still running. "Helen," he said, not turning around, "how many overdue accounts do we have?" 19, sir. And the total? $6,847.50. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What's our exposure if they all default?" Exposure. A financial term meaning, how badly would it hurt us if the worst happened? "We'd have trouble meeting payroll by December," I said. "Trouble or impossibility?" "Impossibility, sir, unless we made cuts." He nodded slowly, still not turning around. Below us, someone laughed, one of the machinists, joking with his neighbor. The sound carried up to where we stood, clear and uncomplicated. "Not yet," Mr. Millard said. "We're not there yet." "No, sir." But we both knew we were heading there. November 3rd brought the first real money we'd seen from an overdue account in 3 weeks. A check from Hutchison Brothers for $173.75, exactly half of what they owed, as they'd promised. I held the check for a moment before entering it in the ledger. It was drawn on Cleveland Trust, signed in Theodore Hutchison's familiar, cramped handwriting. A piece of paper promising money. I would take it to the bank this afternoon, and it would become actual money. Numbers added to our account, value we could spend. But looking at it, I felt not relief, but something closer to sadness. Because this check represented only half of what we were owed, and the letter that came with it said, "Enclosed, please find partial payment. We hope to send the remainder by year's end, circumstances permitting." Circumstances permitting. Another phrase joining the growing collection of euphemisms for, "We don't know if we'll survive long enough to pay you." I entered the payment in my ledger. November 3rd, Hutchison Brothers, partial payment on account, $173.75, dash, $173.75. Then I erased 2 of the 3 pencil marks next to their account, leaving 1 mark. Still overdue, but less severely. Progress, of a sort. That same day, I received 2 more letters. One from Morrison Machine Shop, saying they couldn't pay anything this month. One from a company called Dayton Industrial Supply, someone I'd never corresponded with before, asking if we'd be willing to extend their payment terms from 30 days to 90 days. We are having to ask all our suppliers for this accommodation. We remain committed to paying in full, but we need more time to collect from our own customers. I showed this letter to Mr. Millard. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think if we say no, we lose the customer. If we say yes, we tie up money we might need." Would you say yes? This was not a question about accounting. This was a question about faith. Faith in the future. Faith in other businesses. Faith that the system itself would continue to function. I'd say yes, I told him. For now. He nodded. Then say yes. I wrote the response that afternoon, agreeing to 90-day terms. As I sealed the envelope, I wondered if I'd just made a wise business decision or simply postponed an inevitable loss by 3 months. November 15th. Mr. Millard called me into his office at 3 o'clock, an unusual time. He usually wanted to see me in the morning or at end of day, never in the middle of the afternoon. His office was oak-paneled and serious, with a photograph of his father, the original Mr. Millard, who'd founded the company in 1889, hanging behind the desk. The old man stared out from the photograph with the kind of confidence men had before the Great War, when they believed industry and hard work could solve any problem. "Close the door, Helen." I closed the door and sat in the visitor's chair, my notebook in my lap. "I need you to prepare a list," he said. "All employees, sorted by seniority, least senior first." My stomach dropped. I knew what he was asking. "How many positions, sir?" "I don't know yet. Just the list. With hire dates, current wages, and..." He paused. "And your assessment of their necessity." Necessity. A euphemism for who can we afford to lose? "When do you need this?" "End of day tomorrow." I nodded and stood to leave. "Helen," he said as I reached the door, "I know what I'm asking you to do. I'm sorry." "It's just information, sir. Just facts." "Is it?" I didn't answer. We both knew it wasn't. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, I stayed late at my desk with the personnel files spread before me. 27 manila folders, one for each employee. Each folder contained an application, hire date, wage history, performance notes. I began to make the list. Name, position, hire date, current weekly wage, notes. The newest employee was Robert Chen, hired just 2 months earlier in September. He was a machinist, skilled, fast, good with the precision work. His application said he'd been laid off from Goodyear in August. Before I wrote his name, I remembered. He'd told me once, making conversation while picking up his first paycheck, that he sent money every week to his mother in San Francisco. I wrote his name anyway. Robert Chen, machinist, September 1st, 1930, $23, skilled, no dependents in household. Next was Joseph Kowalski, hired in March, floor supervisor, 4 children. Good man, reliable, had worked his way up from general labor at a previous company. But he'd only been with us 8 months. Joseph Kowalski, floor supervisor, March 15th, 1930, $27, supervisory skills, reliable. Down the list I went, name after name. Each one a person I saw every week when I prepared the payroll. Each one a human being I was now reducing to a line of data, sorting them by their vulnerability to being cut. Margaret Hughes, hired in January, secretary. She'd mentioned once that she was supporting her father, whose railroad pension had been cut. She typed 90 words per minute and kept the filing system immaculate. Margaret Hughes, secretary, January 4th, 1930, $18. Excellent skills. Could be consolidated with my duties. That last note felt like a betrayal. I was suggesting my own workload could absorb hers, which meant suggesting she wasn't necessary. But Mr. Millard had asked for honesty, for assessment, for the information that would allow him to make choices. The oldest employee by seniority was Jack Morrison, hired in 1915. He was 50 years old, had been through the war, lost 3 fingers on his left hand in a machine accident in 1923, but learned to work around it. His wife had died of influenza in 1929. He lived alone in a boarding house on East Market Street. I put him at the bottom of the list, last to be cut if it came to that. Though I wondered if being last was actually a mercy or just a slower execution. By 8:30 that night, I had the complete list, 27 names arranged in order of expendability. I'd added a final column, estimated monthly savings if terminated. Bottom 6 employees, $547 per month. Bottom 10 employees, $965 per month. Bottom 15 employees, $1,426 per month. Clinical, mathematical, precise. I typed it up on clean paper, made 2 copies, and placed one in a folder for Mr. Millard. The other I filed in my desk drawer, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps as evidence, perhaps as confession. Then I put on my coat and walked home through streets that had gotten very dark and very cold. And I thought about the difference between information and culpability. Thanksgiving fell on November 27th that year. Mr. Millard gave everyone the day off with pay, a gesture that felt both generous and ominous, like a last good meal. I spent the day with my mother in our small apartment on 2nd Street. We had a modest dinner, a chicken instead of a turkey, cheaper, and there were only 2 of us. Mashed potatoes, canned green beans, apple pie made from apples my mother's friend, Mrs. Kowalski, had given us from her brother's farm. My mother was 73, small and bent, with hands that shook slightly from what the doctor called essential tremor, a name that always struck me as odd, as if the trembling were somehow fundamental to her being. She'd been a seamstress before her eyes got too weak for the fine work. Now she mostly sat by the window, doing simple mending, watching the street. "You're worried," she said as we ate. Not a question, a statement. "Work is difficult right now. That boy from next door, the Kowalski boy, he got laid off from the tire factory last week. 4 children in that family." "I know. His father works at your place, doesn't he?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, chewing slowly. "Are they going to let people go?" I didn't answer immediately. I never discussed company business, even with my mother. But sitting there in our small kitchen, with the radiator ticking and the afternoon light fading, the pretense of separation between work and life felt absurd. "Probably," I said. "Including the Kowalski man?" "I don't know. Maybe." She nodded, unsurprised. "The world is breaking," she said. "You can feel it breaking." "It's just a difficult period. It'll pass." She looked at me with the particular expression old people get when young people say naive things, a mix of pity and irritation and love. "Maybe," she said. "But things that break don't always go back together the same way." After dinner, I washed the dishes while my mother sat at the table with her mending. The radio was on. We'd bought it 2 years ago, a major purchase, and a news program was talking about bank failures and unemployment figures, and something about President Hoover's response to the crisis. I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about my list. 27 names sorted by date. 6 people marked in my mind as the most likely to be cut. I knew their faces. I knew which machines they operated, which shifts they preferred, how they looked when they picked up their pay envelopes on Friday afternoons. Robert Chen always said, "Thank you, Mrs. Carter," when I handed him his envelope, as if I'd given him a gift rather than wages he'd earned. Joseph Kowalski had a habit of counting his money right there at my desk, his lips moving silently as he went through the bills, making sure it was right. Not because he didn't trust me, I knew he trusted me, but because the counting itself was a ritual, a confirmation that the week's work had translated into money that could feed his children. Margaret Hughes always stayed a few extra minutes after receiving her envelope, asking if there was anything else I needed, any filing to be done, any typing, as if proving her usefulness could make her more secure. "You're thinking too hard," my mother said from the table. "I can hear you thinking from over here." "I'm just tired." "You're carrying something heavy. I can see it in your shoulders." I dried the last plate and put it away, then sat down across from her. Outside, the street was empty. Thanksgiving evening, everyone inside with their families, grateful for what they had, worried about what they might lose. "What do you do," I asked, "when you have to choose between bad options?" "You choose the least bad one," she said, "and then you live with it." "What if you're not sure which one is least bad?" "Then you do your best, and you ask for forgiveness later." She threaded her needle. It took 3 tries. Her hands were shaking more than usual. That's all anyone can do. Monday, December 1st. Mr. Millard called me into his office at 8:30 in the morning. He had my list on his desk. I could see he'd made notes in the margins, check marks next to some names, question marks next to others. 6, he said without preamble. "We need to cut 6 positions." I nodded. I'd known it was coming. "Can you prepare the final calculations? 1 week's notice, plus their full week's wages." "Yes, sir." "And Helen," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "I need you to be present when I tell them." This surprised me. Usually, terminations were private conversations between Mr. Millard and the employee. "Sir?" "I need someone to witness, and I need someone who can answer questions about their final pay, their records, what they're owed." He rubbed his eyes. "And frankly, I need someone else in the room so I don't lose my nerve." "When?" "End of day Friday, after the week's work is done." So they would work a full week not knowing they were about to be let go. It seemed cruel, but also practical. Why disrupt production before necessary? Why let people know they're condemned when they still have work to do? I spent that week preparing the calculations. Each termination required precise accounting. Robert Chen, current week wages, 40 hours at 57 cents per hour, $23. Notice week wages, $23. Total due, $46. Joseph Kowalski, current week wages, 48 hours at 56 cents per hour, $27. Notice week wages, $27. Total due, $54. And so on, down the list. 6 people. 6 final calculations. Total cost of termination, $284. Money we'd spend to not have to spend their wages going forward. The mathematics of it was simple. The human weight of it was not. The day was gray and cold, temperature in the low 30s. The kind of day where the sky is the same color as the streets, and everything feels leached of color. Work proceeded normally. The men on the floor didn't know. Margaret Hughes filed paperwork at her desk, humming tunelessly. Robert Chen ran his lathe with the focused concentration he always brought to his work. At 4 o'clock, Mr. Millard emerged from his office. He looked at me and nodded slightly. It was time. "Robert Chen," he called over the railing. "Could you come up to the office, please?" Robert shut down his machine and climbed the stairs to the office level, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked curious, but not worried. Why would he be worried? He'd done good work. He was skilled. He was 28 years old, with his whole career ahead of him. "Have a seat, Robert," Mr. Millard said. I stood against the wall with my notebook, trying to be invisible, trying to be just a piece of furniture that happened to be present. "Robert, I'm going to be direct with you because you deserve that." Mr. Millard's voice was steady but quiet. "We're having to make some very difficult decisions due to the current business conditions. As of the end of next week, we're going to have to let you go." Robert went very still. "Sir?" "It's not about your work. Your work has been excellent. This is purely about the number of positions we can afford to keep." Robert looked at me, as if I might intervene, might have some information that would change this. "I just started in September." "I know. That's part of why—" Mr. Millard stopped, started again. "We're keeping people based on seniority. You're one of our newest employees. That's the only reason." Could I take a pay cut instead?" "We've considered that, but we need to reduce actual positions, not just wages." Robert sat there, his hands gripping his knees. He was a small man, compact, with oil permanently embedded under his fingernails from the machine work. "When?" "End of next week. You'll work this coming week with full pay, and we'll pay you for an additional week's notice. Mrs. Carter has calculated your final wages." Robert looked at me again. I opened my notebook. "Your current week's wages are $23. Your notice week is $23. Total due is $46, which you'll receive next Friday." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, clinical, distant, as if I were reading a recipe. Robert nodded slowly. "My mother, I send her money every week. She depends on it." "I understand," Mr. Millard said. "I'm very sorry." "Yes, sir." Robert stood up. He stood there for a moment, as if he might say something else. Then he just nodded again and walked out of the office. Through the window, I watched him go back down to the floor. He didn't return to his machine. He just stood there next to it, one hand resting on the metal housing, looking at nothing. "Next," Mr. Millard said quietly. We called them up one by one. Joseph Kowalski, Margaret Hughes, Thomas Brennan, William Cross, Catherine Walsh. 6 conversations, 6 variations of the same terrible script. Some took it quietly. Some asked questions. Some just nodded and left. Catherine Walsh, who was 32 and had worked in our shipping department for 9 months, cried. Silent tears that ran down her face while she sat very straight in the chair, hands folded in her lap, listening to Mr. Millard explain that her position was being eliminated. "I'm the only one working in my family right now," she said. "My husband lost his job in June." "I'm sorry," Mr. Millard said. "Everyone's sorry," she said. Not with bitterness, but with a kind of exhausted wonder. Everyone's sorry, but nothing changes. By 5:30, it was done. 6 people knew they would work 1 more week and then be unemployed. Mr. Millard and I sat in his office after the last one had left. We didn't speak for several minutes. Outside, the factory floor was empty. Everyone had left quickly after the shift ended, probably knowing something was wrong, wanting to get away before they found out what. "How much does this save us per month?" Mr. Millard finally asked. I checked my notes. Approximately $547. "And how long does that buy us?" "If receivables continue at the current rate? Until March, maybe April." "And if they get worse?" "February." He nodded slowly. "So we've just destroyed 6 people's livelihoods to buy ourselves 3 months." "Yes, sir." "Doesn't seem like a fair trade." "No, sir." He stood up and put on his coat. "Go home, Helen. And thank you for being here." "Yes, sir." After he left, I sat at my desk for another hour, not working, just sitting. The building was completely silent. The machines were off. The men were gone. The office was dark except for the small lamp on my desk. I opened my ledger to a blank page and wrote, December 5th, 1930. 6 positions terminated. Savings, $547 per month. Cost, unmeasurable. Then I crossed out cost, unmeasurable, because that wasn't proper bookkeeping. Numbers should be numbers. Facts should be facts. But I couldn't think of what to write instead, so I left it crossed out and went home. The mathematics of the business had become simpler and more terrible. Before the layoffs, our monthly expenses were approximately $2,800. After the layoffs, $2,253. Before the layoffs, our average monthly revenue from collections had been roughly $2,100 and falling. After the layoffs, it continued to fall. $1,850 in December, $1,640 in January, which meant that even with 6 fewer people to pay, we were still losing approximately $600 per month. Our bank balance on December 31st, 1930, $3,742.15. I did the arithmetic in my head constantly now, like a song I couldn't stop humming. At $600 per month loss, we had 6 months, maybe 7 if more receivables came in. The calendar in my mind had a red circle drawn around July 1931. That was when the money would run out. Christmas came and went. The factory closed for 2 days, Christmas and the day after. Unpaid days, but Mr. Miller didn't have the heart to make people work. I spent Christmas Day with my mother, and we pretended everything was normal. We exchanged small gifts. I gave her a warm shawl I'd bought in November when I still felt secure. She gave me handkerchiefs she'd embroidered. We ate a small dinner and listened to the radio. On December 27th, when we returned to work, the factory felt different. The 6 missing people had left gaps that the remaining 21 couldn't quite fill. Machines sat idle because there weren't enough operators. Work that used to flow smoothly now had bottlenecks, and the mood had changed. Before, there had been a kind of determined optimism. Things were hard, but we'd get through it. Now there was just watchfulness. People worked quietly, efficiently, avoiding eye contact. Everyone knew what those 6 terminations meant. It could happen again. It probably would happen again. I saw it in the way people looked at me when I passed them in the hallway. I was the bookkeeper. I knew the numbers. I knew who was vulnerable. I had helped make the list. Joseph Kowalski's son, the one who'd been laid off from Goodyear, found work at a grocery store making $12 a week. His father, who still worked for us, told me this when he picked up his paycheck, and I could see the relief in his face. At least something's coming in, he said. I nodded and smiled and thought, $12 a week. In 1928, that boy had probably been making $30. Now he was grateful for $12. On January 2nd, 1931, I opened a fresh ledger. The old one was full, 1,246 pages of transactions, dating back to September 1926. I tied it with string, wrote the date range on the spine in India ink, and placed it on the shelf with the others. 41 ledgers spanning 41 years. A complete record of Millard & Sons manufacturing, from its founding to the present day. The new ledger was identical to the old. Wilson Jones Model C 41, green cloth binding, marbled end papers, 400 numbered pages. Enough pages for 3 or 4 years under normal circumstances. I opened it to page 1 and wrote the header. Millard & Sons Manufacturing General Ledger, January 1st, 1931. Then I began transferring the December 30th balances forward. This is standard practice. The end of one year becomes the beginning of the next. Continuity is assumed. The business continues. But something was different about this ledger. I could feel it as I wrote the first entries. It felt lighter in my hands, not physically, but the way a house feels after someone has moved out, the way a dress looks on a hanger after the person who wore it is gone. It was a ledger that would never be full. I knew this with the kind of certainty that has nothing to do with logic and everything to do with accumulated small observations. The trajectory was clear. The ending was visible. This ledger would hold perhaps 6 months of entries, maybe 8. Then it would be tied with string and placed on the shelf. But unlike the 41 before it wouldn't be because it was full. It would be because there was nothing left to record. January brought more overdue notices, more letters apologizing for delays, more partial payments instead of full payments, more pencil marks in the margins. By mid-January, I had pencil marks next to 31 of our 43 active accounts. That was 72%. Nearly 3/4 of our customers were behind on payments. Total outstanding receivables, $14,230. That number sat in my ledger like an accusation. $14,000. 5 months of operating expenses. Money we'd earned, goods we'd delivered, value we'd created. All of it suspended in the air, existing on paper, but not in any form we could use. On January 19th, I received a notice from Canton Metal Works, one of the companies that had been struggling since September. The notice was printed on law firm letterhead. Notice of Voluntary Bankruptcy Petition. Chapter 11, U.S. Bankruptcy Code. Please be advised that Canton Metal Works has filed for protection under Chapter 11 of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. All collection activities must cease immediately. A list of creditors and outstanding debts has been filed with the court. Your claim will be processed according to the priority established by bankruptcy law. Asterisk. I read it 3 times, then opened my ledger to Canton Metal Works account page. They owed us $234, 2 months of invoices. I took my pen and drew a neat red line through the entire account balance. Then I wrote in the margin, bankrupt, January 19th, 1931. That $234 became $0. Money we were owed became money that had never existed. I walked the notice down to Mr. Millard's office. He read it without expression, then set it down on his desk. How many others are close to this, do you think? At least 6 that I know of, maybe more. What's our exposure if they all go under? I'd already done the calculation. About $2,800. That's a month's operating expenses. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a long moment. We can't survive many more of these. No, sir. Make a list of our most at-risk accounts. I want to know who's likely to fold in the next 60 days. Yes, sir. Back at my desk, I began the new list. This one wasn't about our own employees. It was about other businesses, other companies trying to survive. But it felt the same, sorting people by their likelihood of destruction, organizing information that would determine who lived and who died. Or rather, who died first. Because increasingly, it felt like everyone was dying. We were just taking turns. I have kept my own personal accounts since I was 18 years old and got my first job as a filing clerk at a law office. 43 years of personal ledgers, each one recording my income, my expenses, my savings. My financial life made orderly and clear. On February 1st, 1931, I reviewed my personal accounts. Income, monthly. Salary from Millard & Sons, $120. Total, $120. Expenses, monthly. Rent, $35. Food, for two, $32. Coal, $18. Electric, $4. Mother's medications, $8. Miscellaneous, $12. Total, $109. Net, plus $11. Savings as of February 1st, $798. That looked fine, sustainable, but I knew better than to trust a single month's snapshot. I needed to see the trend. So I went back through my records. June 1930. Savings, $867. September 1930. Savings, $845. December 1930. Savings, $812. February 1931. Savings, $798. The line was going down, slowly but consistently. And I knew why. My official expenses were $109, but my actual expenses were higher. There were the invisible costs, the extra coal I bought but didn't write down, not wanting to face how cold I was keeping the apartment. The food I bought for my mother when she'd run out but insisted she was fine. The quarter I gave to Mrs. Kowalski when I knew her family needed it more than I did. These costs didn't appear in my ledger, but they were real, and they were accumulating. I did the arithmetic. If my salary continued at $120 and my savings continued to decline at the current rate, I would be in deficit by October. But that assumed my salary continued. That assumed I still had a job in October. I sat at my kitchen table that evening with both ledgers open, the company's and my own. 2 sets of columns, 2 sets of declining balances, 2 separate organisms slowly starving. My mother sat across from me, mending a sheet that had torn. Her hands shook as she worked the needle through the fabric. "You should go to bed earlier," she said. "You're working too much." "There's a lot to do." "There's always a lot to do. But you look tired in a way sleep won't fix." I didn't answer. What could I say? That I was watching 2 ledgers drain simultaneously and couldn't stop either one? That I was keeping accounts for my own ending? "The Kowalski boy got let go from the grocery store," my mother said quietly. "Mrs. Kowalski told me this morning. They said they had to reduce staff." "That's too bad." "She said they're going to have to move. Can't afford the rent with just the father's wages coming in." I thought of Joseph Kowalski, who still worked for us, who made $27 a week, who was supporting a wife and 4 children on $27 a week in an economy where that was considered fortunate. "A lot of people are moving," I said. "Where do they go?" "Somewhere cheaper, somewhere with family, somewhere else." "And if there is no somewhere else?" I didn't have an answer for that. March 4th, 1931. Mr. Millard called a meeting of all remaining employees. 21 people. We'd been 21 since the December layoffs, gathered in the main office area at end of day. I stood against the wall with my notebook, though I didn't need to reference anything. I knew every number by heart. Mr. Millard stood at the front, his hands in his pockets. He looked older than he had in December. Something about the set of his shoulders had changed. They'd begun to curve inward, as if he were protecting something in his chest. "I won't waste your time with false hope," he began. "You all know business conditions are difficult. Our orders are down 60% from last year. Our collections are down even more. Many of our customers have gone bankrupt." The room was completely silent. 21 faces watching him. "I'm in negotiations with Franklin Manufacturing in Cleveland. They're interested in acquiring our equipment, our patents, our customer relationships. If the deal goes through, and I stress if, there's a possibility they might hire some of you to continue operations here." "And if it doesn't go through?" This from Jack Morrison, who'd been with us since 1915, the senior man now. "Then we continue as we are for as long as we can. And when we can't continue anymore, we close." "How long is that?" someone else asked. Mr. Millard looked at me. "Helen?" Everyone turned to look at me. 21 pairs of eyes, waiting for me to pronounce sentence. I opened my notebook, though I didn't need to. "Based on current revenue and expenses, we can continue operating until approximately mid-June. Possibly longer if collections improve." "And if they get worse?" Jack asked. "Early May." The silence deepened. Someone coughed. Outside, I could hear traffic on the street. Normal life continuing, oblivious. "What about more layoffs?" someone asked. "Would that buy us more time?" "Some," I said, "but we're already operating with minimum staff. If we cut more people, we won't be able to fulfill what orders we do get." "What about wage cuts? Everyone take less?" Mr. Millard shook his head. "I've considered it, but the math doesn't work. Even if I cut everyone's pay by 1/3, we'd only extend operations by a month or 2. And people are already struggling on what they make." Thomas Brennan, one of our machinists, spoke up. "So what you're saying is, we work until June, and then we're all unemployed." "Unless Franklin comes through." "And what are the odds of that?" "I don't know, Tom. I honestly don't know." The meeting ended. People filed out slowly, some stopping to ask me questions about their accounts, their accrued vacation days. What would happen to benefits if the company closed? I answered each question precisely, factually, without emotion. After everyone left, Jack Morrison came to my desk. He was 50 years old, graying, with permanently oil-stained hands and 3 missing fingers on his left hand from a machine accident years ago. "You've been watching the numbers," he said. "You've known for a while it was coming to this." "Yes." "How long have you known?" I thought about it. "Since October." 5 months. You've been carrying this knowledge for 5 months. "It's my job." "That's a lonely job." He put his cap on and left. I sat at my desk in the empty office, listening to the building settle around me, and thought, yes, yes, it is. By late March, I had accumulated 83 unopened letters in the bottom drawer of my desk. They arrived daily, sometimes 4 or 5 at once, all variations on the same themes: notice of bankruptcy, demand for immediate payment, revision of credit terms, regret to inform you, unable to continue, circumstances beyond our control. I stopped opening them in February. I knew what they said. Each one was either A, notice that someone couldn't pay us, or B, demand that we pay someone else. Opening them only made the knowledge official. Official knowledge required action. Action required resources we didn't have. So I kept them in the drawer, filed by date, unopened, pending. This was not proper bookkeeping. This violated every principle Miss Pemberton had taught me. A bookkeeper's duty is to record and face every transaction, every obligation, every truth. A ledger should be a complete and accurate record, not a curated selection of facts we can bear to acknowledge. But I had discovered something Miss Pemberton never taught us, that there are kinds of truth that become unbearable, not because they're false, but because they're too numerous. One catastrophe can be faced. 10 catastrophes can be managed. But 83? When does a ledger of losses simply become proof of defeat? I never told Mr. Millard about the drawer, but I think he knew. I think he was grateful not to know officially. We had developed an unspoken agreement. I would tell him what he needed to know to make decisions, but I wouldn't burden him with every piece of bad news that arrived. It was a form of mercy, perhaps, or cowardice. I wasn't sure which. One afternoon in late March, I opened the drawer just to look at them. 83 envelopes, neatly arranged by date, each one containing information that would make our situation official in some new way. I took one out, dated March 12th, from a company called Toledo Industrial Supply. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper. Then I put it back, unopened, and closed the drawer. Some truths could wait. April brought spring weather. Temperatures in the 50s, trees budding, the kind of days that feel like promises. But in my ledger, April was the month everything crystallized into final form. On April 3rd, Mr. Millard received word that the Franklin manufacturing deal had fallen through. They'd decided not to acquire us. Something about current market conditions making expansion unwise. He told me in his office, just the two of us. He sat at his desk with the rejection letter in front of him, and he looked at it for a long time without speaking. "So that's that," he finally said. "Yes, sir." "How long do we have?" "I'll need to do exact calculations, but roughly 8 to 10 weeks. Can you give me a date?" I did the arithmetic in my head, factoring in our current cash position, our expected revenue, our minimum operating expenses. "June 15th, I said. "Give or take a week." He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Make a list of what we need to do to close properly. Legal requirements, final payments, records that need to be preserved." "Yes, sir." "And Helen?" He looked up at me. "Thank you for staying, for keeping the accounts straight. I know this hasn't been easy." "No, sir." "You've been doing the arithmetic this whole time, watching it unwind. That's its own kind of burden." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and left. Back at my desk, I opened a new page in my notebook. Not my ledger, but my private notebook where I kept the information that didn't fit in any column. Requirements for closing a business. Legal. File dissolution papers with the state. Notify all creditors of closing. Notify all customers. Pay final wages and taxes. Preserve records for required period, 7 years. Financial. Calculate all final payroll. Determine priority of remaining payments. Liquidate assets, equipment, inventory, vehicles. Close bank accounts. Final tax filings. Human. Inform employees. Give maximum notice possible. Provide references where possible. Assist with unemployment applications. Remember that 21 people's livelihoods end with this business. That last item wasn't necessary for the legal closing, but I wrote it anyway. The last weeks required precision. Everything had to be calculated exactly. Who would be paid what, in what order, with what money remained. I spent 3 days in mid-April working out the final accounting. Available resources. Cash in bank as of April 15th, $2,340.78. Expected collections, next 60 days, $840, optimistic. Equipment liquidation, estimate, $2,000 to $3,000. Total available, approximately $5,200. Obligations. Priority 1, legal requirements. Final payroll, 21 employees, 2 weeks, $1,134. Payroll taxes owed, $287. My own final wages, 2 weeks, $60. Mr. Millard's deferred salary, $0. He'd taken nothing since February. Subtotal, $1,481. Priority 2, secured debts. Bank loan on equipment, $1,200 remaining. Property taxes owed, $430. Subtotal, $1,630. Priority 3, supplier debts. Current invoices, essential vendors, $890. Older outstanding invoices, $2,340. Subtotal, $3,230. Priority 4, unsecured creditors. Various outstanding debts, $6,780. Total obligations, $13,121. Total resources, $5,200 shortfall, $7,921. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. We could pay priorities 1 and 2. Priority 3 would receive partial payment. Priority 4 would receive nothing, which meant we would close owing almost $8,000, money owed to other businesses who were themselves struggling, who had their own payrolls to meet, their own creditors to satisfy. Our failure would ripple outward. Every dollar we didn't pay was a dollar someone else wouldn't receive, couldn't use, would have to write off as loss in their own ledgers. I presented these figures to Mr. Millard on April 20th. He studied them for a long time, making notes, asking questions. Finally, the employees, they'll be paid in full? Yes, sir. Full wages through the final day, plus 1 week's notice pay. And you? Same as everyone else. You should take more. You've been here 17 years. The money isn't there for sentiment, sir. He nodded. When do we tell them? as soon as possible. They deserve maximum notice to look for other work. There is no other work. I know, but they deserve to try. April 27th, 1931. Monday morning. Mr. Millard called everyone to gather at the start of shift. 21 people stood on the factory floor, looking up at where we stood at the railing. The machines were silent. They wouldn't start until after the meeting. The quiet was strange, unnatural. This space was meant to be loud. "I'm not going to draw this out," Mr. Millard began. His voice was steady but quiet. "The Franklin deal fell through. We don't have other options. We'll be closing operations on Friday, June 12th. No one spoke. Several people nodded, as if he'd confirmed something they'd suspected. "That gives you 6 weeks to look for other positions. I'll provide references for anyone who needs them. Mrs. Carter will help with unemployment applications or any other paperwork you need." "What about our final pay?" someone asked. Mr. Millard looked at me. I stepped forward. "Everyone will be paid in full through June 12th, plus 1 week's notice pay. You'll receive your final checks on June 12th. I'll have exact calculations for each person available next week." "What about accrued vacation?" This from Jack Morrison. "Paid out in full in your final check." "And the equipment? The building?" Mr. Millard answered that one. "There'll be an auction, probably late June. The proceeds will go to pay off remaining debts." Thomas Brennan spoke up. "What happens if someone wants to buy a piece of equipment? Like if I wanted to buy my own lathe and try to do piecework from home?" "You'd have to bid at the auction like anyone else. I can't give preferential treatment." More questions. About health coverage. Ends with employment. About unemployment benefits. They could apply, but odds were poor. About whether there was any chance of the business being sold as a going concern. No. About whether anyone would actually hire them if they found openings. I have no idea. I answered each question precisely, factually. This was what I could offer. Accurate information, clear numbers, the truth rendered in the language of accounting. After the meeting ended and people returned to work, Jack Morrison came up to the office. "You've been carrying this knowledge alone," he said to me. "Since October, you said. 7 months. It's my job." "No," he said. "Your job is bookkeeping. This is something else." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not pity, something more complex. What's it like, knowing before everyone else? Watching it happen in slow motion? I thought about that. "Like watching someone fall," I finally said. "You can see they're going to hit the ground. You can calculate exactly when and how hard, but you can't stop it." He nodded. "That's a hard thing to know." "Yes." "Are you all right, Mrs. Carter?" No one had asked me that. Not once in 7 months. Not Mr. Millard, not my mother, not anyone. "I'll manage," I said. "That's not what I asked." I looked down at my ledger, at the neat columns of numbers that had been my whole professional life. "I don't know," I said. "I honestly don't know." He left. I sat at my desk, looking at the numbers, and realized I'd told the truth for once. I didn't know if I was all right. I'd been focused so intently on the business's accounts that I'd stopped monitoring my own. May was a month of endings disguised as ordinary work. People came to work every day. Machines ran. Orders got filled. Small orders now, from the few customers still operating and still paying. But everyone knew. The knowledge sat in the room like a physical presence. I spent May preparing for the closing. Lists upon lists. Final payroll calculations for 21 employees. Tax filings and final payments. Correspondence with creditors. Documentation for the auction. Records to be preserved and stored. Every evening I stayed late, working through the details. The building would be empty except for me and the sound of traffic outside, and the settling sounds old buildings make. On May 15th, I opened my personal ledger and did my monthly accounting. Savings, $712, down from $798 in February, down from $867 last June. The line continued its steady descent. I did the projection. If my savings continued to decline at the current rate, and I didn't find new employment, I would be broke by December. 7 months. That's how long I could last without income. I added a line to my closing lists. Update my own resume. Begin looking for bookkeeping positions. Prepare for possibility of no employment. That last item sat there, stark and factual. What do you do when the arithmetic of your own life stops working? When your personal ledger moves inexorably towards zero? May 28th. I received the notice from the auction company. Industrial Equipment Auction, June 18th, 1931. Millard & Sons Manufacturing Complete Liquidation. To be sold, metalworking equipment, machine tools, office furniture, vehicles, inventory, and miscellaneous items. All sales final. Cash or certified check only. Asterisk. I showed it to Mr. Millard. He read it without expression, then handed it back. 42 years, he said. That's what it reduces to. Complete liquidation. Yes, sir. My father built this with 3 men and a second-hand lathe. Do you know what his first order was? 16 pipe fittings for a plumbing contractor. He made them himself, working 16-hour days in a shed. 16 fittings. $22. I didn't know that, sir. He kept the invoice, framed it, hung it in his office. Said it was the most important $22 he ever earned, because it proved the business could work. Mr. Millard looked out the window at the factory floor. I wonder what he'd think, seeing it end like this. I think he'd understand that you did everything you could. Did I? I keep wondering if there was something else, some decision I should have made differently. The economy failed, sir, not you. Maybe, but it feels the same from where I'm sitting. The morning of June 12th was overcast and humid. Temperature in the mid-70s. The kind of weather that feels heavy and expectant. People arrived for the final shift quietly. No one was late. Everyone knew this was the last time. I'd spent the previous evening preparing 21 pay envelopes, each one containing final week's wages, notice week's wages, accrued vacation pay, a letter I'd typed summarizing their employment dates and final compensation. Each envelope was sealed, with the person's name written in my careful script. Work proceeded through the morning with a strange intensity. People seemed to be working harder than usual, as if quality still mattered, as if the work itself was worth doing well, even though it was ending. At 3 o'clock, Mr. Millard stopped the machines. The silence was absolute. For the first time in 42 years, the factory floor of Millard & Sons Manufacturing was completely quiet during working hours. "I want to thank you all," Mr. Millard said, his voice carrying in the silence. "Some of you have been here for years, some for months. But every one of you has done honest work and done it well. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and I'm sorry it has to end this way." He paused, and I could see him struggling. "Mrs. Carter has your final wages. Please see her at the office before you leave. And," his voice cracked slightly, "thank you for everything." People began to line up at my desk. One by one, I handed out the envelopes. Each person signed a receipt confirming they'd received their final pay. Each signature was the formal acknowledgement that their employment had ended. Jack Morrison was last. He took his envelope but didn't open it. 17 years you've been here, Mrs. Carter." "Yes." "And what will you do now?" "Look for another position, I suppose." "There are no positions." "I know." He looked at the envelope in his hands. "My wife used to say, 'At least we'll always have Jack's steady work.' She said that right up until she died, like it was a certainty. Like a job was something you could count on, the same way you count on the sun rising." "I'm sorry." "We all believed it, didn't we? That if you worked hard, did good work, you'd be all right. That the numbers would add up." "Yes." "Turns out the numbers don't care how hard you work." He signed the receipt, pocketed his envelope, and left. By 4 o'clock, the building was empty except for Mr. Millard and me. We stood together in the silent office, looking down at the empty factory floor. "I'll need to come in next week," I said, "to finish the paperwork, prepare for the auction, close the accounts." "Of course. Take whatever time you need." "And after that?" "After that, I sign the dissolution papers, hand the keys to the bank, and walk away." "Yes, sir." We stood there for another moment. Then Mr. Millard put on his hat and coat. "Thank you, Helen, for everything. For keeping the books straight all the way to the end. For," he paused, "for bearing witness." "Yes, sir." He left. I stayed another hour, sitting at my desk, not working, just sitting. The building made settling sounds around me. Outside, the city continued its ordinary business, oblivious to the fact that in this one building, something had ended. Finally, I opened my ledger to the last page with entries. I drew a neat line across the bottom of the page. Below it, I wrote, "June 12th, 1931. Final day of operations. All accounts closed." Then I closed the ledger for the last time. June 18th, 1931. Thursday. The auction. I wasn't required to attend, my work was finished. But I came anyway. I wanted to see what numbers look like when they became physical objects again. When the neat columns in my ledger translated back into machines that could be touched and moved and sold. The auction company had arranged everything on the factory floor in numbered lots. Little white tags attached to each item. Lot 17, Cincinnati milling machine, 1923 model, good condition. Lot 18, metal lathe, Wilson brand, with tool set. Lot 19, office desk, oak, 1915. That last one was my desk, the one I'd sat at for 17 years. It had a water stain on the left corner from where I'd once spilled a cup of tea. In the ledger, I'd carried it at its original purchase value, $45. In reality, on June 18th, 1931, it was Lot 19, Estimated value? $5 to $8. The auctioneer was a short man with a surprisingly loud voice. He stood on a platform, the same platform where Mr. Millard used to stand and watch the work, and called out lot numbers while men in work clothes wandered through, examining equipment, making notes. About 30 people were there. Some I recognized as competitors or other manufacturers. Some looked like scrap dealers. All of them looked for bargains. Lot 17, the auctioneer called. Cincinnati milling machine, 1923, good condition. What am I bid? $50 to start? Silence. 40? 30? A hand went up. 20. I have $20. Do I hear 25? Silence. Sold for $20 to bidder 14. In my ledger, that machine was carried at $340, its purchase price in 1923, minus accumulated depreciation. In theory, it was worth $200. In practice, in June 1931, it was worth $20. This was the final lesson, that the numbers I'd been recording all these years were not values, but opinions. They were collective agreements about what things meant, what they were worth, how much faith we all had in the future. And when the faith dissolved, the numbers dissolved with it. I watched as Lot 19 came up, my desk. Office desk, oak, good condition, $5. Do I hear 5? Someone bid $3. It sold for $3. By afternoon, the auction was complete. The auctioneer tallied the results and gave Mr. Millard the final accounting. Total proceeds, $2,640. Barely enough to satisfy the bank loan. Nothing left for the other creditors. Mr. Millard and I stood in the empty factory afterward. All the equipment was gone. The floor was bare except for oil stains showing where machines had stood. The space echoed. 42 years, Mr. Millard said again, and it ends with an empty room and $2,640. Yes, sir. That's not a very good return on a lifetime of work. No, sir. He turned to me. What will you do, Helen? Look for another position. You know there aren't any. I know, but I have to look anyway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. It's not much. I wish it could be more. I opened it. Inside was a check for $200. Sir, I can't. Yes, you can. You've earned it 10 times over. Consider it severance, or a bonus, or payment for staying until the bitter end. I don't care what you call it. Just take it. Thank you. Thank you, Helen, for 17 years of honest work, for keeping me informed, even when the information was terrible. He paused. For counting it all. For making sure it was witnessed. We shook hands. Then he walked out of the building for the last time, leaving me alone in the empty factory. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the silence. Then I left too, closing the door behind me. July 1931. My name is Helen Carter. I am 41 years old, and I am unemployed. I wake each morning at 6:30, old habit, and sit at my kitchen table where the light comes in weak and gray. The table is covered with newspapers, all of them folded open to the employment sections, all of them offering nothing. I have applied to 47 positions in the past month, 23 bookkeeping positions, 12 clerical positions, 8 secretarial positions, 4 general office positions. I have received 6 responses, all negative. The others never replied. The problem is simple. There are too many bookkeepers and not enough books to keep. This morning, I reviewed my personal ledger. July 15th, 1931. Assets. Savings. $847. Includes $200 from Mr. Millard. Skills. Bookkeeping, typing, business correspondence. Age. 41. This is a liability in the current market. References. 1. From Mr. Millard. Liabilities. Rent. $35 per month. Food for two. $32 per month. Coal. $18 per month. Electric. $4 per month. Mother's medications. $8 per month. Miscellaneous. $12 per month. Total monthly expenses. $109. Income. $0. Runway. 7.7 months. That's the arithmetic of my life now, rendered in the same language I used to track the death of Millard and Sons. I have 7.5 months before my savings are gone. 7.5 months to find employment in an economy where unemployment in Ohio is at 42%. The odds are not good. I have been thinking about what bookkeeping means. For 17 years, I believed my job was to record reality, to capture in ink and numbers the objective truth of transactions and balances. I believed the ledger was a mirror, reflecting what was actually there. But I understand now that a ledger is not a mirror. It's a net, and what it catches depends on the size of the mesh. The large things, the official things, the things that can be reduced to debits and credits, those get caught and recorded. But most of life slips through. Where in my columns was Robert Chen's mother in San Francisco, waiting for money that stopped coming? Where was Joseph Kowalski's daughter, learning that there wouldn't be money for shoes? Where was Jack Morrison's loneliness, or Mr. Millard's shame, or my own exhaustion, the kind that settles into bones and stays there? These things don't fit in any column, but they are the truth nonetheless. Yesterday I walked past the building where Millard and Sons used to be. The sign was gone. The windows were dark. A handwritten notice on the door said, "Space available. Contact Riverside Realty." I stood there for a moment, looking at my reflection in the glass. A woman in a worn coat, holding a newspaper full of want ads that wanted nothing. And I thought, this is what numbers look like when they become nothing. This is what columns become when they're empty. This is the ledger of loss. But then I thought something else, that I had kept the records. All of them. Every entry, every balance, every terrible, honest account of how it ended. The 42 ledgers, 42 years of Millard and Sons manufacturing, were now in storage at a warehouse, preserved as required by law for 7 years. And there was something in that, not comfort, but something. A small, stubborn assertion that the ending had been witnessed, that the loss had been counted, that we had been here. I keep a new ledger now. It sits on my kitchen table next to the want ads and the growing stack of rejection letters. It's just a small notebook, nothing official. In it, I write 1 entry per day. Not numbers, just facts. July 10th. No response to yesterday's applications. Rent paid. Savings, $812. July 11th. Interview at Henderson and Company. Did not get position. Given to younger woman. Potatoes for dinner. July 12th. Mrs. Kowalski brought bread. Her husband found 3 days' work per week. Small mercy. July 13th. Mother's cough worse. Cannot afford doctor. Applied to 2 more positions. July 14th. Letter from Jack Morrison. He found work at a garage, $15 per week. Something at least. July 15th. Applied to 5 positions. No responses yet. Savings, $809. These are not the kind of entries Miss Pemberton taught me to make. They don't balance. They don't reconcile. They don't add up to anything except the daily fact of continuing. But I keep them anyway. Because I am a bookkeeper, and a bookkeeper's job is to record what is true, even when the truth is unbearable. Even when all the columns are empty. Even when the ledger itself becomes a record of nothing. Especially then. This morning I opened the newspaper and read the statistics. Unemployment in Ohio, 42%. Bank failures nationwide, 1931, 2,293. Foreclosures, rising. Breadlines, lengthening. Hoovervilles, spreading. These are the numbers of a nation. But I read them as a bookkeeper reads numbers, as a story made of columns, each digit representing something that once was whole and now is not. Each number is a business that closed, a family that lost income, a person like me sitting at a kitchen table doing the arithmetic of survival and finding the equation doesn't balance. We are all keeping ledgers now. All of us making pencil marks in margins, tracking the steady subtraction of security, watching our personal balances decline towards zero. And I wonder, when enough individual ledgers fail, what happens to the ledger of the nation? When enough people reach the end of their arithmetic, what number do we all add up to? My name is Helen Carter. I'm 41 years old. I'm a bookkeeper without books to keep, in a time when nothing balances, in a country learning to subtract. And I am still here, keeping the accounts of loss with whatever small accuracy remains to me. The columns are empty. The balance is zero. But I am still writing, still recording, still bearing witness to the fact that we were here, that we tried, that we counted every loss as it happened and did not look away. This is what I have. This is what I can offer. This is the ledger I keep now, a ledger of nothing, which is also a ledger of everything that mattered and couldn't be counted. The numbers have stopped, but the accounting continues.